what's up, everybody? This is an open discussion with C3 Films. My name is Chris, and this is.
Cheryl.
And today we're going to be talking about the Marvel movie Shang-Chi. If you haven't seen it, we are going to be going into spoiler territory here. The movie's been out for a little while. It came out in theaters first and then came out on Disney Plus a couple of weeks ago. We just saw it on Disney Plus a couple of weeks ago, which is why we're just getting to talk about it. But we're excited to be able to finally talk about this movie that we know that a lot of people enjoyed, and then we get to see how we felt about it. So now that that's out of the way, reminder, if you haven't seen it, go and check it out on Disney Plus and then watch it and then watch us talk about it here. It is worth seeing without having the spoilers so that you can properly enjoy it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, Cheryl, so I know that you're a Marvel fan. I know for a fact you're a Marvel fan and you like superhero movies. I know you like DC a little bit more. But as far as this character goes, this is a character that's not well known, even among comic book fans. Most people don't know about the character of Shang-Chi. So, for you, how did you feel about this character and this movie going into it, like, with no knowledge?
Yeah, I'd never heard of him before, but I was so excited to see an Asian superhero. And I was nervous because I did not want it to be bad. So I'm very happy that they, made a pretty decent film for it. So I feel good because even though it's not an entirely 100% Asian cast, it's a pretty good amount. There's very few people in the movie who are not Asian. So, not that it makes me happy. I'm just excited that, we have something like this come out where, there's just so few of them at all, really. It's a very small percentage of films that even have one Asian person in it. So to have another one of these come out not too far away from Crazy Rich Asians is just very exciting for me. And it's also, I know it has martial arts, which is very commonly associated to Asians, but this is a little different because it's in the Marvel universe. So now we're connected to all the other heroes. I feel like they hinted a little bit that he's going to be in the next Doctor Strange movie, possibly. Seems like it. And then we had Bruce Banner at the end in the after credit scenes as well. So it just, it's connected. It's not a one-off. It's not going to only happen once. I see that we are going to see Shang-Chi come up again in the future, which makes me happy. I feel like he's not as strong as a character as the Black Panther universe in those characters. It's definitely like a lot smaller of a character, but I'm glad we have one in there. So I, in general, like just overall happy and pleased that we have this movie.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So since you brought it up, I'll go ahead and talk about that real quick. So you're talking about as far as him being as strong of a character as Black Panther, and I think you just mean like from notoriety standpoint, like not that people know about. There's more people that know Black Panther than Shang-Chi. But now, as far as just talking about the character itself or himself, I actually think that Shang-Chi is a little bit more interesting in his own movie than T'Challa was in Black Panther. They made T'Challa he feels, for lack of a better term, a very bland, kind of blank slate of a character. There's not, like, when you think about the character of T'Challa, you can't really think about anything that makes him stand out as far as, like, his personality or what he likes, what he doesn't like. He doesn't really leave that much of an impression. It's the characters that are around him that leave more of an impression, like Okoye and M'Baku. Like, these are characters that are actually more interesting than the main character himself. And I feel like with Shang-Chi, they did a better job of not having that happen again. Shang-Chi is still surrounded by a cast of characters that are also very interesting, like his sister, like Katie. These characters have other things going on with, his sister being abandoned and having to teach herself martial arts because her father wouldn't train her. Katie being an Asian American that doesn't fully speak the language, and what struggles and challenges that makes for her, having to face in her regular everyday life. So like, these are all the characters that are interesting, but Shang-Chi still has something about himself that also like stands out, and that's interesting. One of the things that I liked most about him was the fact that when he was told to go and do the evil thing of killing somebody, he lies about it and makes it seem like he didn't do it, but then near the end of the movie you find out he actually did. So for me, that gives him more character. It means that he did something that was wrong, and then after he did it, he decided to change his ways, and that's what led him to become the person he is today. But that adds texture and depth to that character. So in that way, I would actually say that I think the character of Shang-Chi is just a little bit more interesting than the character of T'Challa for Black Panther.
Yeah, they definitely gave him more of an arc because he does already know martial arts, but then when you first meet him, he's basically doing the bare bones of being alive, which is just having uh, not a very like prestigious job, especially for an Asian person. They're I guess like for us as Asians, we're like expected to do like an office job or a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. But he's a valet, and his friend Katie is also a valet, and they just do that. He lives in a garage in San Francisco, so he's starting at like the bottom basically. And then by the end of the movie, he's a full-on hero. So they gave him a really big arc. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why he seems more interesting, as opposed to Black Panther, where he doesn't really have too much of an arc. He basically is already in towards the end of his arc
Right.
when we first see him.
Right. His arc more comes from the villain, basically the villain convincing him that he's wrong. That's the change that Black Panther makes, which is still an arc, but it's definitely not the same level as it is for Shang-Chi. And even just feeling him coming from like the bottom and going up, right? Because he's already like king at the start. T'Challa's already king at the start of Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, and there's a lot of good things that are happening throughout the movie. Um, I don't want to compare it so much with Black Panther, but one other thing that Black Panther and Shang-Chi do have in common is that they have relatable villains. I think Black Panther was one of the first movies that had a genuinely relatable villain that people like loved and understood. And I think Shang-Chi continues that trend in Marvel movies with Wenwu.
His father.
Yeah, because Shang-Chi's father, his motivations are very understandable. And even when I hear him talking, when I was watching the movie, what he was saying sounded reasonable to me. It's a story about a man who is dealing with grief. And you could say that maybe it's a little cookie cutter of like the man who was an evil person that met the woman that changed his life, and he changed his life for her, and then she dies and he becomes evil again. But the added thing to this that makes it stand out more to me is that the overall plot of the movie isn't about destroying the world because he's angry or anything else like that. His motivation is strictly related to trying to rebuild his family, and he feels like the only way he can do that is if he saves his wife, who he believes is imprisoned in this magical land. And so, from his perspective, like we know by later on in the movie that he's being lied to, but from his perspective, he doesn't know that. So he's not actually doing anything wrong, and all of his motivations are technically based in love. And I think that that's really cool because when he asks his children to help him, my first thought is, yeah, why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was interesting because, like, at the very beginning, I actually knew that he would be the villain, obviously, because they introduce him as a villain, but then and I thought he was gonna be evil, but he actually isn't. Especially with that whole love story and everything, and so I just felt like almost like there was no villain in the movie, and it wasn't like a good guy versus bad guy thing. It was it's just a conflict of interest basically. So there's no
Yeah.
real bad guy except for maybe that evil dragon thing,
Dragon thing.
evil dragon squid thing that came out.
Cthulhu.
Yeah. um, but yeah, I really like that, and I don't know, I just his father is actually pretty likable. I really liked his character. I felt like he was a good guy. Um, very early on in the movie, and even though I knew he was going to be the conflict, I could just see like they're already like at the very first few scenes of the movie, they're like, oh, there's this bad guy and he does evil things, and then he fell in love and he became a good person. But you still know that he's going to be the villain of the movie, but we already like him at the very beginning of the movie. So it's just such a unique way of doing something like this, especially for a Marvel movie where Thanos, right? If you think about Thanos, is like, okay, Thanos is a pretty bad guy, even though he was trying to do something good, I guess, just in a
Question mark?
yeah. It's not so black and white, and for this movie, it was very gray, and I really like that.
Yeah, same. I also just found myself laughing because when I would hear certain lines that his father would say, because there were times when you understood where his father was coming from. When his father and comes back to see his wife murdered, and then decides to go and take his son with him to watch as he's about to murder the people that had something to do with it. In that moment, I have no problem with what his father is doing. I'm like, yeah, go get them. They just came to your house and just murdered somebody, and they would have murdered your kids too if she didn't plead for their lives. So, this is fine. I'm completely okay with this, even though I know it's leading you down a dark path. And I also laughed at like that line where they're in the magical place, and one of the elders says to him that we didn't let you in because your sins would have destroyed this place. And when Wu looks at the guy and says, "Watch the way you talk to me, young man. I have lived 10 of your lifetimes." And I just laughed so hard because he's calling this old man who has to be like 70 or 80 a young man because he's like 1,000 years old. So everyone's a baby to him. And I love the fact that he's still just like, yo, you better respect me. And then the guy shuts
your
up.
Elders.
Yeah, respect your elders. I was like, ooh. Say more.
It's a very big thing in the Asian community. Respect your elders.
Right? So, no, he's absolutely great as a villain. I was sad to see that he died at the end, but it makes sense. But even in that moment when he does die, you see like that recognition in his eyes that he messed up. He did something wrong, and he doesn't fight anymore, and he just gives his rings to his son.
Yeah,
and I think that's great.
I feel like he didn't really need to die, but then I was also thinking, but then how will he, he would have to remorse and then find a place in the world for himself. So that made it hard. So then it made sense for him to die. But I also felt like he didn't really need to. He could have still, been there for his kids, and I felt like it's so sad for the kids because they lost both of their parents. But it's a movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it made sense for him to die. I just didn't feel like he needed to. They could have done it. They could have let him live. But yeah, it was definitely very powerful though that he made that sacrifice to save his son, and that was his last thing that he did in his life. So that's that's just really touching.
It is. And then, what was your? How'd you feel about? I mentioned them briefly earlier, but how'd you feel about Katie and I forget his sister's name, but how did you feel about those characters?
I liked, I think they did a good job about making strong female characters. Although Katie wasn't very strong, so to say, but she held her own. And when she was in trouble, it wasn't Shang-Chi that saved her, even though he was trying to. It was the sister. So I was like, yeah, we don't need a guy to save us. We just need to save each other. And
I
then,
had a problem with that moment. I had a problem with that moment though, because the only reason they were even in that situation was because she locked them out in the first place when she ran off with Ronnie Chang and they closed the door. The only reason they were even had it outside on those scaffolding was because the sister ran off and closed the door behind her. So we're actually only in this situation because of you. So I'm not saying thank you, but I'm glad you're here.
yeah, I mean, I'm just glad that they didn't do that thing where I mean, I guess they didn't really need to do that where Katie needed to be saved, but if they're going to do that, I'm glad that Shang-Chi didn't save her and it was someone else and it was a female. So I'm like, if you're gonna do it, I'm glad you did it that way. So
Right.
that's how I felt. Because I saw it coming, I was like, oh great, he's gonna save her and but I also quite enjoy the relationship that he has with Katie, where it's like there's kind of like a romance, but then it's a questionable one. Like they're not very like lovey-dovey. They're very like best friends things, kind of, or that kind of way. Which I like because I feel like that's more real life. It's more down to earth that they are so chummy. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you felt any chemistry there, like that there was a romance there. I do. I think they kind of hinted on it a little bit. They definitely care very deeply for each other. Maybe it'll develop more in the future, but I just like that they didn't have some like. I mean, Aquafina is like awesome and beautiful in her own way, but she's not the typical like hot hourglass, graceful, beautiful, tall, skinny woman.
Mhm.
She felt more like a regular person that you would see. And I thought about like why they casted her as opposed to like someone like Gemma. I forget her last name.
Emma Chan.
Gemma Chan, who is like she's drop dead gorgeous, and like very easily could have been the love interest for Shang-Chi, but wasn't. We have Aquafina. So I really like that as well, that they did that for this movie.
Yeah, I'm kind of like in a mixed place with it because I still kind of hold true to the belief that I don't feel like every movie needs a love story. But at the same time, I like what you were saying about how Aquafina feels more like a real person, and it would feel better for to have like one of these larger than life superhero characters basically falling in love with and getting with somebody that feels like a real person as opposed to like a 10-star model because that's what normally happens. But at the same time, I do like the fact that they were just friends, but I also know that historically whenever you see a woman who is not seen as traditionally beautiful, she usually does end up as only being the friend role or the comic relief. So I don't know where I fall on it at the end of the day. So I'll just kind of sit back and just kind of see what they do, and then I'll let you know at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I did struggle a little bit with that too, because I was like, why are we not having like a gorgeous like Asian woman being in this movie like they do in all the other Marvel movies, and I guess you could say in all the other movies, there's
Right.
always like a drop dead gorgeous woman in the show or in the movie, and we didn't really have that. And so I felt like, are we sending a message that like there just aren't any that are castable? um but it's so hard to say because you could always be critical about who is casted and who is represented. So
Right.
I'm just going to take it as like I like the way Aquafina was portraying the character. I
Yeah.
like the relationships. I like how strong Katie is and the sister is, and Michelle Yeoh. So I'm gonna take that, and I'm gonna know like I know that there are other movies that do that representation. I know they did it a lot in Crazy Rich Asians, so I'm just gonna back away from that one and appreciate the casting that they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where I kind of end on it too for right now is just like take the win. We'll take the win for now, and we'll see where we end up. The other cool thing about this movie that you got to talk about are the action scenes and the fights, how they all are choreographed. And I know you want to talk about the bus scene, so we'll talk about that in a second. But before that, I want to kind of just talk about how just the martial arts themselves are portrayed on camera. There's a lot of kinetic action with these fight sequences. There's this one moment when they're on the scaffolding, when he's on the inside and they're fighting. He's fighting this guy with a knife, and he catches the knife out of the air, and that was a practical stunt that Simu Liu did himself, which is awesome because when you see it on camera, it looks great. And I kind of wish they didn't show it in the trailer, but there's a lot of cool choreography that went into this movie. Another thing I really liked is I think Caboose said it's Jialing, maybe it's Jialing, um, but her fight scene with the rope spear, like that's a weapon that I personally love, and I'm even using it in one of my stories. But I don't see that weapon on screen that much. So to see that weapon make an appearance in a Marvel movie with a character that also is not in the comic books was pretty cool to me. I loved seeing the choreography with that specific weapon, the rope spear, the spear on one end, and then the metal ball on the other. It was really cool. So I really enjoyed how some of the action scenes played out.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say, I have seen a lot of, I guess, Chinese dramas and period pieces that were made in China and Hong Kong and such, and it felt like I was, especially at the beginning, it felt like I was watching one of those, which was really nice, because it just means that they kept true to the arts of the martials, the martial arts, and and I have to say one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Shang-Chi's parents meet,
Yeah.
and that's because I felt like it's very stylized and very Asian drama. And I think the martial arts styles are. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but I could see the mom doing Tai Chi, and the dad's style is very like brute force kind of. It's more
Yeah.
offensive, and hers is more defensive.
Like,
And
they're
I
just using kung fu, actually.
Yeah, like they're actually doing real kung fu, basically real martial arts, and I liked how like they showed the two of them falling in love while they were fighting. Like I really like that. It's very like Chinese drama. They do that all the time, but like they put it in this movie, so I'm like, yeah, I feel so represented.
I mean, it's great, and they had them speaking Mandarin.
Yeah, and they were speaking Mandarin. It was real Mandarin. I don't know Mandarin, but I can recognize it. So, and I know some phrases I know they were using. And I know there were like parts like I usually have a problem with, like it making sense for when people are switching between languages. And in this case, they switch between English and Mandarin. But they made it make sense. They made it a point for us to understand why they can speak both Mandarin and English. And so I didn't have any problems with that, even though I was looking at it with a microscope, if you couldn't tell, but because I made note of it and I recognized that they put that effort in there.
Right. So, let's go ahead and talk about the bus scene now. What did you think? What did you think about the bus scene? And then after we talk about that, I'll tell you what I didn't like about the movie, so much.
Okay, real quick, I really liked that section because it happens in San Francisco, so again I feel represented. But like the whole time I was watching the bus scene, I was like, okay. There was this one moment where the CGI was very, very CGI, but it was just that one moment, and like I was like, okay, when you're driving in San Francisco, I'm sorry, there's I've there's no way you're gonna drive for that long on a bus without stopping. No one like pulling the thing for a stop. And like I guess the bus driver had headphones and so he couldn't hear what was going on. But like when you're driving, you use your mirrors, right? So there's just a lot of logical problems on there. And I get it's an action scene and it's supposed to be a cool action fight scene on a bus, and that's supposed to be really badass and cool and stuff. But like me being on San Francisco, I'm like, I wish the bus drive that fast to get somewhere. So, and that it's that empty.
Yeah, and there's no traffic anywhere as well. Because reality, you just be hitting car after car after car.
Yeah.
It's funny too because it works for a movie, but when you live out in San Francisco, you kind of know the streets that they're on because they start up by the Fairmont, which is up on California Street, and like the bus is like going down California, and somehow, and they're like a couple of blocks in the city, like not that far from Market Street, and then by the end of the trip, they're by Ghirardelli Square, which is by Fisherman's Wharf area, which is a completely different area of San Francisco. And I remember just watching it and being like, how that works.
Yeah. Which I get. They do that like in movies all the time, right? It's not it's not like they are trying to be true to the geography of,
right, because they can't.
Yeah, exactly. And like they're just trying to make it look good. And it looked good. It did. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. I was maybe because I'm from San Francisco was a little bit removed from it, and the whole time I was just like, this is not how bus works.
Right.
This is just not how bus works.
But they get props for creativity because it was an entire it was a boss fight. It was an entire fight on a bus, which I haven't seen in a while. You see fights on trains all the time, but a fight that's taking place inside and outside of a bus, especially a two-section bus, is pretty unique. So I got to give them props on that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely that was even though I was a little removed, that was one of my favorite fight scenes in the movie. I think it really started off the movie very well with that, showing not just his ability, but like even more of the relationship that he has with Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing I'll talk about is just the thing there was only two parts. One isn't a big deal. One is nitpicky, and I can ask you if you felt the same way or you noticed it, and the other one's a little bit big. I'll start with the nitpicky one first. When they're so normally with the movie, it established that certain characters speak Mandarin when they're with each other and no one else is around to like hear them, and that would benefit from them speaking English. And so when they were in the other world, the magical world, and the moment right before Shang-Chi and his father start to fight, they have this very emotional conversation about like if he's going to be stopped or whatever. And in that moment, it felt weird to me that they weren't speaking Mandarin and that they were speaking English because there was no one else around and it was just the two of them, and the movie made a point of showing that these characters would speak Mandarin with each other when they were alone, especially when he was a kid. So that felt weird to me. It's very nitpicky, but like, did that bother you, or do you think that that made sense and that wasn't a big deal?
I don't think it was a very big deal to me, because I know that when you speak English and Chinese, you often switch back and forth depending on like how you feel. Sometimes it just comes to you. Sometimes you're just able to express it in one language better than the other way.
Yeah.
But I mean, it honestly didn't really bother me. It was more, I was looking more at like, I thought that that Katie was helping him learn English. So I was like, how come he doesn't have an accent? But then they explain it later, because his dad, actually was like asking him, have you been practicing your
Right.
English? So we know that, it's that they grew up with both languages, learning both languages. So to me it makes sense that they would switch back and forth.
Okay. And then yeah, and then my other thing, and this was actually more of a bigger thing, or more, yeah, more of a big thing, is that I so I love the movie up until a point. I personally am not a big fan of the CGI monster battle that happens at the end of the movie. I like fights with people. I like seeing the physical connection and battling of and the connection between the father and son. There's a lot of motion behind that. I found myself not caring as much about this spiritual CGI monster that is kind of connected to the plot but has no real connection to Shang-Chi himself. And that whole end section with the dragon and the Cthulhu dragon felt very hollow to me. And I didn't, it almost felt like a Disney movie at that point to me. And I didn't enjoy that as much as I enjoyed the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I did think it was a little weird, because there's even this part where like the dragon drops them off on the shore, and they don't even turn around and thank him for like everything. I'm just like, okay, so he just a taxi cab to you, but but at the same time, I kind of liked that they had it. I would agree that it was a little hollow, but I was also more okay with it than I thought I would be. Probably just because I was excited to see a dragon, in the movie in that capacity, because like that's how, you know, it just feels familiar to me, because like it's definitely like I felt like the dragon was a higher being that was worshipped, and that is often how, they are portrayed in Chinese dramas, where they are like a being that we can't communicate with, but they exist and we worship them, and they just come in and they do a thing for us, and then they go off back to their place, because that's what they do for us. So I wasn't too, um, I guess, distracted by it, because that is kind of how they are portrayed in, some Chinese dramas. So,
Yeah.
but I did feel like it was weird when the dragon dropped them off. And I really like. I have to say, I liked the CGI hair, the red hair on the dragon. I thought that was really cool. I was like, that's, a lot of detail that they put in there.
Yeah. No, agreed. Like I think the way the dragon looked was good, and even the animation for how it moved, how it was very serpent-like, and how we've seen like because Chinese dragons are very different than European dragons, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
have a different look to them and they move differently. So like seeing it move on screen and how well it was animated, I thought that was very, very good. Um, but yeah, I just found myself having a little disconnect with that portion of the movie just because it like I said before, like it just felt a little hollow to me. But you know, that was just the one part for me. everything else in the movie, for the most part, I absolutely enjoyed, and I think the movie did a really good job.
Yeah, I was like I said earlier, I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the job that they did for it. And that like there's a really good movie out there that is an American movie and has an Asian cast in it, and it's not all about being Asian.
Yeah, that's true. Just people, right?
Yep,
That
they're just
happen to
people.
be.
Yep.
So, but yeah, like that's basically everything that I had to like really say. Is there anything else that you had that you really wanted to get off your chest before we get out of here?
um, there's some stuff that I think we can talk a little bit more about later. But I did want to point out that I thought that there were a lot of funny moments in this movie. But I know we didn't really get to touch on it, but there were a lot of good jokes. I forget his last name, but Ronnie's in it, and
And
yeah. And Wong was in it. Benedict Wong from Doctor Strange was in it. A nice connector to the Marvel universe. But yeah, I thought it was just really well crafted. I think Aquafina did a good job. I know you're not like a huge Aquafina fan, but I think she did a like a spot on job in this movie. It was very
I agree with
balanced.
you. Like, even not really enjoying her that much in other things, like in this movie, I thought she was fine. Like, there was nothing about her that bothered me. Like, in all honesty, I think her character is super relatable. Her struggle with wanting to find something that she's good at, but also not wanting to just do a thing just because people tell her that that's what she needs to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it felt like a very quote unquote millennial mindset, but it's a mindset that I share and that I can relate to as somebody who's spent the better part of his adult life trying to figure out what he wants to do and to do things that are more creative and things that are fun because that's what's important to him. And so that being part of her struggle and her journey made it so that she was a character that I could relate to, and therefore I kind of really enjoy her character in this movie.
Yeah, I definitely felt very connected to the characters. So, and that's also another achievement I think, and really nice to have for um, in a mostly Asian cast movie. It's just so overall like good that I'm just proud that they made it, and I'm happy that they made it, and that they made it well. I felt like justice has been served.
Right?
Almost, yeah.
And even those struggles that we're talking about aren't specifically Asian struggles, they are struggles that people have. And that is the great thing about it. It's like, yes, these are Asian people, but Asian people also have problems just like everybody else because at the end of the day, they are people.
Mm-hmm. With evil dads that are 1,000 years old.
Evil
Uh,
dads with rings on their arms. But yeah, so let's go ahead and call it there. Where this one ran a little bit long, but I mean, we knew it was going to with everything we wanted to talk about. We'll talk about it for a little bit longer on our stream. So if you guys want to check out more of our conversation on the movie, you can check out our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/C3Films. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cut out of here. What did you guys think about Shang-Chi? Did you see it in theaters when it came out? Did you watch it on Disney Plus? Did you enjoy the representation that was in this movie? Did you feel connected if you're from San Francisco and watched it? Whatever you thought about the movie, comment below. Let us know. And while you're down there, if you give us a like, share, and subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and we'll see you all next time.